Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to A Hand Mirror. This is poem number 3 of the 29 of By the Roadside. And in some ways, this poem is often contrasted with some of those more optimistic poems, celebratory poems of the human body that we saw in our Calamus section when we worked through those poems. Now, our assumption is that you've been with us from the beginning. LearnStrong.net down the left-hand side, our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. And I hope that you've been with us from the very beginning and the inscriptions all the way up, and including an introductory set of comments for By the Roadside, and then finally the poem Europe that we just finished with. Now, our background information here from our Nortons tells us this poem has remained unchanged and with the same title since its first appearance in the 1860 edition. Of course, the same edition when the Calamus poems were published. And certain manuscript shows that its original title, later deleted, was actually Looking Glass. And it is interesting to kind of think about Looking Glass, and of course Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, and the idea that we're going to see here played out, for example, when we look at this poem as it relates to, for example, what Aristotle said in Poetics. We've given full lectures on it at LearnStrong.net about how in great art you look into a mirror and you see something reflected back that tells you something about yourself, maybe even see yourself in a different way. You'll remember that Hamlet says the same thing in Hamlet 3, the play within the play right before it, where he talks about great actors always have this ability to do this. Now, I have said to you guys that I think it's wrong to see Whitman as just a blind optimist who always sees the world as amazing. I think he's what we call an informed optimist. That is to say, he is optimistic, like we have said in earlier lectures. He said, I like to see the sunny side. But that doesn't mean that he can't see the other side. So let's take a look at this with a hand mirror and play the game. By the way, you'll remember that mirror from Song of the Rolling Earth, passage number 1, is utilized. He says it this way: hold it up sternly, see this it sends back. Who is it? Is it you? Outside, fair costume. Within, ashes and filth. No more a flashing eye, no more a sonorous voice or springy step. Now, some slave's eye, voice, hand, step. A drunkard's breath, unwholesome eater's face. Venereal's flesh, lungs rotting away piecemeal, stomach sour and cantankerous, joints rheumatic, bowels clogged with abomination, blood circling dark and poisonous streams, words babble, hearing and touch, callous, no brain, no heart left, no magnetism of sex. Such, from one look in this looking glass, ere you go hence, such a result so soon, and from such a beginning. Now, it's always fun, of course, in these poems to ask who is the you that Whitman is speaking to. Sometimes, obviously, it's you, the reader. Sometimes it is actually Whitman himself, and there's a reading of this that actually shows Whitman in his maybe phase of self-loathing. This may have something to do with some choices that he's made and what's going on. Notice he'll begin by saying, hold it up sternly. In other words, look right at it. We think of Sylvia Plath's mirror as well here, don't we, at 3A? See this, it sends back. And then notice the dash there to make us think of Emily Dickinson. And then in parentheses, is it you? I'm sorry, who is it? Is it you? In other words, when we look in a mirror, we have this interesting question about who actually it is that we're seeing. And he says, you know, on the outside, we have fair costume. Hey, do you guys remember this from Song of the Open Road, passage 13? I mean, I won't read a lot of it, but do you just remember this when he said it this way? Behold, through you as bad as the rest, through the laughter, dancing, dining, supping of people, inside of dresses and ornaments, inside of those washed and trim faces, behold a secret, silent loathing and despair. Well, we're going to obviously play the game of what happens when there is the ruination of the body. Notice he calls it a fair costume. Within, on the outside, fair costume. Within, ashes and filth. Now, of course, readers of this poem originally, because they had been so steeped in the gospel accounts, would recognize the Matthew 23 passage the Pharisee passage that on the outside it's a beautiful tomb, but on the inside it's disgusting. Here the use of the word filth takes us, by the way, back to Song of Myself passage 20. And then what's gone, what's lost. And I think Whitman here is playing the game of what's lost. By the way, why is a poem like this in By the Roadside? Well, we said that in these poems, it's as if Whitman becomes the observer of all the things that he's seeing. And what is it that he is seeing? Well, joining any number of homeless people, street people that would have been people of his day, hanging out in Fafs and other bars where he hung out. No more, he says, a flashing eye. No more a sonorous voice or springy step. By the way, notice there's three things lost. Now, that is to say, the movement of, and as we've talked about it in Plato's Republic, Book 8, the declension of state. Here we're going to play this game. No more flashing eye, no more sonorous voice, springy step. Now, some slave's eye and voice and hands and step. And again, Whitman, the abolitionist, pointing out that this is what makes slaves slaves. They are broken in some fundamental way, tragically. He'll then talk about drunkards. Remember, he's part of the temperance movement. Drunkard's breath, unwholesome eater's face, maybe overeating. Venerealese flesh, we've seen this venerealese in Song of Myself, passage 19. Lungs rotting away piecemeal. Remember that when Whitman is writing this poem, we don't have the medical care then that we have today. So a lot of these kinds of things will have been witnessed and experienced by any number of readers. Lungs rotting away piecemeal, stomach sour and cantankerous, joints rheumatic, the body starts to break down, bowels clogged with abomination. There's a whole series of thought that says that one of the biggest challenges of Whitman's day is what happens in the tummy region because of the bad food that's being eaten, right? Abomination. Blood circulating dark and poisonous streams. In other words, illnesses that are going to be carried within the blood. Words, babble. Here you're beginning to lose your mind, maybe your ability to talk. Hearing and touch, callous. You begin to lose feeling, we might say. No brain, no heart left. And then interestingly, no magnetism of sex. And of course, this line will take us back to Song of Myself, passage 3, always sex. And he uses that word so rarely in Leaves of Grass. Such from one look. Now, this word such, in other words, all the things that have just been listed, from one look in this looking glass, again, the original name, ere you go hence. Such a result so soon, and then the dash again to balance with the dash of the first line. And from such a beginning, exclamation point. Now, I have said to you already that in earlier poems of By the Roadside, and I think a lot of Hamlet stands behind By the Roadside, I do. You remember in passage 5, when he picks up Yorick's skull and he begins to have that conversation with Yorick's skull, he says, "Get thee to my lady's chamber and tell her to paint it on an inch thick," as he's holding a skull. This is what she'll come to. Of course, the irony is that obviously he's telling Yorick's skull to go to Ophelia's bedroom and tell her to paint it on, put her Maybelline on an inch thick. This is what it's going to come to. And of course, he's standing next to Ophelia's bedroom, the bedroom that Ophelia will now, live in for a very long time. So what are we going to do with a poem like this? Like, how do we draw messages, for example, at 2A? Well, I think one of the realities, and Dante's Inferno does come to mind with a reading like this. One of the things is it's easy to lose one's way, right? You'll remember in Dante, we're talking about in the middle of the way I got lost. To deteriorate, to lose. At 2B, all of the loaded adjectives that are a part of this, just go back and look at all the adjectives, and it's compelling to try to draw a picture, can we call it a Jobian picture? Poor Job with his terrible boils and pain and suffering. I think that at 3A, there's a number of titles. We've mentioned a few already. Prufrock's Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, T.S. Eliot's Every Day We Prepare a Face to Meet the Faces That We Meet comes to mind here. Dunbar's We Wear the Mask, we've given full lectures on it. We mentioned Aristotelian poetics, the idea that we look into the dramatic mirror to see what it is that we see. I've mentioned Sylvia Plath's mirror as well. Finally, at 3B, how do you own a poem like this? Well, it's a fair question to ask, so we'll ask it. What do you see when you look into a mirror? Like, when you look into the mirror and see yourself, what do you actually see there looking back at you? And what is for you a powerful version of a quote-unquote ruined person, a person who is going through this declension as we've talked about. It may be a film, it may be in reading. What is it for you? I mean, we think about, for example, Dickens. He's so great at this thing, right, for Expectations with Havisham. That idea that, you know, the deterioration is happening and you get to kind of witness or see it happening. Well, Whitman is observer, and we're going to see more of this as we move on to the next poem, Gods. It is an interesting little poem. I hope that you're being challenged, even with these somewhat lesser known poems of Leaves of Grass. Thank you.